Hello everyone. Today is March 31st, 2020, and we're in the midst of this coronavirus issue, and I hope everyone is safe and healthy out there. This video that I'm producing right now is about showing you how the township supervisors and our finance director / temporary treasurer are misleading the public. And you could even say, in my opinion, lying to all Exeter residents. And here, I will present you with all the evidence to support my opinion. The video recordings evidence does not lie. And what you will see in this first clip, it's about 22 seconds long, is basically you will hear, and this was recorded on March 9th, 2020, which was the last Exeter Township Supervisors meeting. You can see it on exeterunited.com, and you can also see it on my YouTube channel. But you will hear Mrs. Savage describe the creation of a new equipment fund and $5 million of sewer money is transferred into this fund. And you will hear later Mrs. Savage emphasizing that we add up all the funds to arrive at her $3.8 million surplus. She clearly states it is from the sewer proceeds. So this video is pretty much focused on one thing, showing you how they're lying to the public about this $3.8 million surplus. It doesn't exist. It never has. We've been running deficits for years, and I'm going to show you how we still have a deficit. So I think we got it clear. The equipment fund is really made up of money from the sewer fund, sewer proceeds. The sewer proceeds have nothing to do with our budget. Unfortunately, they're the proceeds of selling our number one asset. So they don't come into play doing the budget for 2020. And my contention is that we have a deficit in our 2020 budget, and they're covering it up with sewer fund proceeds. So you'll hear her several times in other clips that I'm including in here, where she will insist that we've got to add up all the funds. And if we add up all the funds, we have a surplus. But one of those funds has $5 million from the sale of the sewer plant. They have nothing to do with the revenue generated by the township to fund the general fund. And later in one clip, you'll hear her say that revenues exceed expenses, and that's why we have a $3 million surplus. It's simply not true. It doesn't make sense. And you'll see why in a later clip.'t you for listening, and please leave comments on the video. If you don't want to leave a comment, give me a thumbs up, all right? That will show me that you're with me, because I'm not seeing the support that I think I should be getting. I'm not doing this for fun. This is a public service. I get nothing out of it except the satisfaction of knowing that I'm revealing an incompetent group of supervisors and a completely incompetent staff that's overpaid. You can leave comments on my YouTube channel. They won't show up immediately until I approve them. But if they're decent comments, positive or negative, not insulting, I'll approve them, and you can read the comments at a later date. Again, thanks for listening. Enjoy my clips. Thank you.
Capital improvements funds, that is just a capital fund that we use for equipment purchases and the such. The equipment fund that is newly established, that was money from the wastewater sale proceeds that came, that $5 million, and the plan is to utilize the interest earnings from that to pay for equipment over the next however many years.
Here you will see the second clip. This is taken from the January 13th, 2020 meeting. And you will hear Mrs. Savage accuse me of referencing a deficit. And that's correct, I am referencing a deficit. There is a deficit in our general fund, which accumulates about 98% of all the revenue and monies coming into the township. And she clearly claims in this video that there's no budget deficits, and she blames it on typographical error. But by the time I evaluated the budget that was released, if there was a typographical error, it was corrected. So I worked off of information that had no error, but this is a great excuse. She insists on adding all the funds together. You heard her say that again, right? And she says, and very aggressively, again, claims a $3.8 million surplus. She again claims we have to add up all the funds, right? Well, remember, she created the capital equipment fund and moved $5 million of proceeds from the sewer fund into this fund, the capital equipment fund. So she's adding that into the budget process and saying this is a surplus. It's not a surplus. It's just another separate capital fund that has nothing to do with the budget process. There are a lot of other funds. Some of them have their own revenue stream. But a lot of the funds are also provided income from the general fund or through issuing bonds. So in this case, this fund, this equipment fund, was created by taking sewer money. It has nothing to do with our budget. I'm looking strictly at the general fund, and we have a major problem. I hope you listen. I hope you'll agree with me. Give me a thumbs up or leave me a comment.
What's the action?
Everyone keeps referencing a deficit. We are not running at a deficit. There was in the budget presentation, there was a typographical error in the summary. Mr. Hughes, you have something to say?
She's trying to help.
Okay. There was a typographical error in the summary of the budget.
I
It has
looked at
been
the
fixed.
detail. $1.8 million deficit.
No, actually we don't. Not when you look at all the funds together, which is what you were referencing
that my
before.
Please, just let Jen talk. Let her tell us.
Talking directly to me, so.
Because you were laughing at me, sir. Okay? Not professional or respectful. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
So we are not running at a deficit. The summary page of the draft budget had a typographical error on it, which was fixed. The finalized budget shows a $3.8 million surplus when you have.
Okay, this is the third video clip. It is from the January 27th, 2020 meeting, Supervisors meeting. And you will hear at the end of a presentation that was given by Mrs. Savage on 2019 fund balances and results. Mr. Howell asked a question about the $3.8 million surplus, which Mr. Speece said in the January 13th meeting, and you can see that video only at ExeterUnited.com or at my YouTube channel because the township never videotaped that. But you will hear Mr. Speece tell us that they would address the $3.8 million at the next meeting, which is the January 27th meeting. But they avoided that. And that's why Mr. Speece asked the question, why, what about the $3.8 million surplus? Which they never really discussed until he asked this question. And Mrs. Savage, you'll hear her say that this is a $3.8 million surplus. And again, Dave Speece says that they're going to address this issue, this $3.8 million surplus. But when, David? Because you still haven't addressed it. You can even issue a statement. The problem is you can't explain a lie. You can't explain something that doesn't really exist. Now you have to listen very, very carefully at the end of this clip, because you will hear Mrs. Savage state very clearly, it's at the very end of this clip, that revenues exceed expenditures. This is patently false. And I think you will see in the next and final clip why it is false.
Want to address a question now? Mr. Howell?
Yes, this all came about because Ms. Savage at the library claimed that there was $3.8 million surplus, and I don't see that figure anywhere in her presentation.
That was actually the budget that was referenced. There was a
For
reference to
2020.
a deficit budget for 2020. There is not a deficit budget. When you compare all the funds, there is a $3.8 million excess, not a deficit.
Well, why didn't you compare all the funds for the rest of the public?
We're gonna,
That was interesting.
it's a little public comment, but yeah, that is actually 2020.
That's the 2020
The plan.
budget, correct.
The plan.
Correct. Revenues exceed expenditures by 3.8.
This is the fourth clip coming up. It was an excerpt from the March 9th, 2020 Exeter Township Supervisors meeting. And Mrs. Reilly asked a very good question about where is the money coming from to cover the Homestead Act revenue loss. Very good question. And here, and only here, is where you will hear Mrs. Savage finally admit taking sewer fund money and interest that we're going to earn on the sewer fund receipt money to balance the general fund, to cover the deficit in our general fund. She admits it. She says it very clearly here. You can't mistake what she said. You're going to hear it with your own ears. So why would you need to balance the deficit if we have a surplus? And this is the question I kept asking myself over and over and over again, because I thoroughly reviewed the budget. Now this deficit is in the general fund, $1.8 million, but there are other deficits in other funds. But this is the main fund. As I said before, 98% of the revenue that we collect goes into the general fund. The general fund funds other funds that do not have revenue sources. Some of the other funds do have revenue sources. So it's interesting how we have a surplus. And the only way we do that is by the creation of this capital equipment fund, and they put $5 million in there from the sewer plant proceeds to try to cover up the deficit.
Where does the money to cover the reduction in taxes come from?
We've balanced the budget that we can accommodate the reduction in taxes. There is money coming from the interest income from the wastewater plant, and also from the sewer funds for people continuing to pay their backhoe sewer bills.
Is this going to happen every year?
The plan is to have it every year covered.
Every year, I believe. We'd be smart to do that.
And I'm worried about this because Mrs. Savage right now is the interim treasurer, and she has control or responsibility for our $50+ million in the bank. She also runs every 2 weeks the check distribution run, and then creates the checks to pay our vendors. And I'm concerned about that as well, because if you believe me in what I've just shown you, we have a question of ethical behavior. The board members were all praised about this. I think one board member even said, yes, he agreed that we have a deficit. And yet nothing was said, nothing was done. This young lady was allowed to mislead us, lie to the public, and continue to lie adamantly. So I'll leave it up to you. If you see what I put here, I've referenced the meetings that these clips came out of. So if you feel that they might have been taken out of context, you could go to those meeting videos, and you can watch them. But I want to tell you that most of these videos are not on the Exeter Township website. For example, the January 13th video. They never videoed that meeting. So subsequently, the only place you can see it is either on ExeterUnited.com or on my YouTube channel. So I encourage you to develop your own opinion on this, and if you agree with me, I encourage you to get involved. This is our community. There's a lot of money at stake here. If you don't take action now, and you plan to be in Exeter Township for a long period of time, let's say over 5 years, you better come to the meetings. You better insist that David Speece explain this. Because it's my belief that they're going to raise taxes, township taxes, either next year or certainly the year after that. And don't be surprised if 5 years out or earlier, they go out to get some bonds to spend more money. That's a different issue that we could talk about later. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was enlightening you on what's going on in this township.